Tall Boy is a deer that he literally just blew up. Monster frame 9-pointer. Main frame 8 with a small G4, just a huge deer. And I knew he'd like to live back on this ridge at the back end of this farm.
Oh my gosh, dude. This is a freaking monster deer.
So Tall Boy is a deer that I've got some history with over the years on this lease that I've got. And he's always a deer that's just always had a really nice frame. He's looked good, but I've always had other bigger deer, like higher scoring deer that I wanted to hunt. But Tall Boy has always been in the back of my mind because he's just got such a cool frame. In 2022, he literally just blew up, like monster frame 9-pointer. Main frame 8 with a small G4, just a huge deer. Once deer get hardhorn, man, they start working those scrapes immediately. Their hormones change, they start marking their territories. You know, you got different deer communicating on food plots or around food sources, hitting these scrapes. And it's a great way to get some of the more mature bucks in front of your camera. This area of the farm that Tall Boy lived, I wanted to have a scrape on the edge of this clover plot to where I could get his picture. I wasn't intruding much, but I could tell when he was using that plot, kind of a little bit what his pattern was, and I knew he liked to live back on this ridge at the back end of this farm. This farm was 240 acres, but in the area that I live in Ohio, with all the big timber and rough terrain, a farm that size can hold a lot of big mature deer because they have different areas they can feed, different acorn flats. There's not a lot of crops in my area, but there is some, and so like this farm has a little bit of corn on it that year and beans, and so they have different options. Deer can bed in different areas, so you know, running your trail cameras close to those food sources, travel routes, water holes, water sources are all going to be places that can help you get pictures of the mature deer that live on a farm and help you decide which deer you really try to want to focus on. One of my big things is always making sure that the deer on my leases or the properties that I own, that they have food sources all year round, whether it's clover from spring through summer, they transition to crops that they have, you know, to eat on that the farmers put out, knowing where the acorns are and what trees are going to hit that year, may not hit, apple trees, etc. You know, that's why I'm a big believer in clover. I plant a lot of clover because clover is something that's good in the spring, lasts through the winter, comes back the next year. You just got to keep maintaining it by mowing it, once in a while spraying it with clethodim and things like that to keep the grasses under control, or buterac to keep those broadleafs under control so your plot will stay nice and fresh. It's a great plot, you know, it's a perennial. You can get 5 to 6 years out of it. And I just have so much luck getting mature buck pictures on clover plots. And putting mock scrapes close to clover plots or where deer are entering these plots has been a tactic for me for years that I get a lot of big mature buck pictures on. Tall Boy lives in the back of the farm. He's got his own acorn ridge back there that he loves to be on. By knowing your farms and running cameras and just knowing how deer move and trying to piece the puzzles together of what your cameras tell you, helps you understand those things. The times of day you get pictures of deer at certain spots. Tall Boy, I'd get daylight pictures of him in this back clover plot, come into that scrape, then he'd work out into the beans from back there. So I knew that he was back there bedded close because I was getting his pictures at daylight. Then I'd get him early morning, like before daylight, going back. So that tells you, you know, knowing those things helps you piece the puzzle. If you've got a property and you're getting a deer at 2 o'clock in the morning, say on a scrape in the middle of your property or on the edge or whatever, and like that's the only time you get it, that deer typically probably does not live on you, or he's not close to that spot. So you either need to find the spots where he's closer to, so you can kind of hone your locations to be a little closer to where he's going to be daytime active. Knowing the woods, knowing the food sources, the acorn ridges, etc., where deer can be, like a lot of times in early season, deer start hitting those acorns. They fall off the plots for a little bit. When the acorns start dropping, everybody thinks their deer left or their big bucks left, but really they're just in the woods. They're eating white oaks, red oaks, black oaks, whatever's falling right at the moment. It's a new food source. It's highly nutritious, high in protein and fat for them, so they want to stock up on that. Then they'll go to the greens again and out to the grains at night. So don't freak out if your big bucks aren't showing like they were. They're probably just buried in the timber, eating acorns. So being I got this clover plot in the back and I've put this mock scrape, I've got a redneck ghillie blind on one side of the plot and I've got a Novik stand on the other side, more towards the bedding side and to the timber. Like, I wanted to get high enough in a tree where I could cast my wind over this scrape, because a lot of times those mature bucks, they like to come into a spot like that where they feel the wind is good for them to be able to smell. But sometimes just how you're positioned, you can get your wind to cast over them or by them just enough. It's going to give you that shot opportunity. And that's exactly how I set this Novix up, was just for that spot. But with my stand, the way that I had it situated, I wanted to make sure that my wind would be the most consistent. And so I did not want to move my stand to the more lush spot of the plot. So I was really relying on this mock scrape to make sure that I could get these mature deer coming from their bedding area off this acorn ridge into the plot to do what I wanted them to do. And that's exactly what these deer were doing. They would get out of their beds, feed on those acorns back there behind me in the ridge. They'd come through the weed staging area into the plot, work that scrape, go on out to the better part of the plot or the bean field. When I decide to hunt tall boy, I'm gonna hunt by myself and I'm gonna see if I can't lay eyes on tall boy, get a shot. So I go back to the plot and I've got this stand hung, like I said, to where the wind, you know, if it's coming straight out of basically the east, it's gonna blow over the ravine. If it's coming out of the west, southwest, it's gonna blow out into the plot, but farther out into the plot, like closer to the other edge of the plot, to where I feel like it's a chance, but it's gonna blow over the deer that are staying tight to the tree line in front of my stand, working that scrape.
Well, if we can keep our thermals up and put our faith in the phase system, we're gonna be all right.
I'm sitting there and I got this doe. I'm watching this doe and kind of like had me preoccupied, honestly, and it's kind of my own fault. I should have been paying attention. And all of a sudden I look to my left, I catch movement and there's tall boy right there. And I mean, he's marching and he's just marching right by me and cuts in front of me, and I just catch him for a few seconds on film. And that is the hard part about self-filming and trying to get deer kills on film. Like, I could have easily shot him if I wouldn't have been filming. So I literally just had to back off. It wasn't the time of year where deer calls are gonna be super effective. You know, I did actually give him a little grunt, but he didn't really want nothing to do with it. And so I just laid off. I didn't want to spook him. I'm like, he'll be right back in here tomorrow night. I'll slide in here with Dylan and I'll get Dylan to come film and we'll try to take advantage of that situation and see if I can't get an arrow in him.
Last evening, I was sitting on a deer I called Tall Boy. I was filming myself both evenings. Tall Boy come right in here to my left, down this tree line, just like I expected him to. Marched right in here, and I just couldn't even get a shot. Tonight I brought Dylan, so hopefully we can make it happen. If I wasn't trying to move the camera and everything, I probably could have got him shot last night. So, just, if it's up, if it's meant to be, the good Lord's gonna make it happen. So, we'll just sit here and give it a heck.
We're sitting there for a while. We had some small deer movement, some does moving through. It rains a little bit, and I told Dylan, man, if this rain stops, it is gonna be on fire. Anytime that the weather gets a little stirred up like that and then stops in an evening, it just gets deer on their feet. Whether they're on their feet or not, it makes them move. And we got this little rain shower, it stopped, sun come out, it was still cool, it was just beautiful. It was like, this is gonna happen. And I knew that Tall Boy probably was on his feet back in that acorn patch eating acorns. And I'm like, just get here before dark, please. And sure enough, I see deer movement. And all of a sudden I see Tall Boy's rack. And I'm like, there he is. He's right there. So Dylan gets ready, gets turned in the stand, and Loppy is the first deer out. He's an older 8. Loppy gets right in front of me, kind of stops. And I almost think he's gonna get our wind. And he just kind of, for some reason, he didn't. He didn't, you know, he didn't spook. Puts his nose back to the ground and goes and starts working that scrape. Tall Boy is behind him, Tall boy hangs up for a second, and I'm thinking, I got my bow in my hand, Dylan's trying to film, I'm thinking, what is this deer gonna do? And for a second, I literally thought he was gonna go in the woods behind me. Then all of a sudden he switches again, pops right back out.
Meh. Meh. Thank you, Lord. He did. He's done. He's dead. He's a giant. He's right there. That's a big boy. Oh my gosh, dude. That is a giant buck. I don't care. Look at that. I'm so tickled with this deer. Like literally. That's a pig. This is a freaking monster deer.
To sit behind a 6.5-year-old deer is really special. I mean, because like you think about it, a deer that's 6.5, what he's experienced, what he's seen through the winters, the amount of hunters he's got by, in general survival mode, and especially in country like mine where there is a fair bit of pressure. You know, these are some bigger properties, but everybody around that property hunts and they hunt hard. It's a bait state, there's a lot of baiting going on. You just got a lot of odds stacked against these deer to get to 6.5 years old. Being that the one night I encountered him, and some may question, like, why did you hunt him again immediately the second night? What made you know that he was gonna do the same thing again? And early season like that, those deer are really patternable. The bucks are starting to get their oats, they're getting their hard horn now, they're starting to make a lot of scrapes, they're creating dominance and things like that, but they're still very patternable because they're still putting on fat, putting on feed. They haven't been pressured, so their guard is down a little bit. You know, they're not like full survival mode as far as from hunting pressure. And so like a lot of times deer will repeat that pattern. Now he may go do the same thing twice in a day and you may not see him for 3 days in that same spot. But I had a feeling from just past intel and how he loves that spot of the farm that tomorrow's weather was going to be the same. There could be a little rain. I felt like he was going to move to that plot just like he always has.
Meh. Meh.
Some keys to this hunt, obviously the walk-in, how you access a stand like that, knowing a deer's patterns to a degree. You're not always going to know like, okay, that deer is going to walk right out that spot. But in general, knowing the direction a deer should come from that you're hunting. Not just any deer, the deer. And that's what I'm very big on, is hunting a deer, a specific deer. And knowing that deer's habits and what he likes to do. You know, you have to be a student of the game in that sense. So that is where like cell cams, long distance scouting with a spotting scope, things like that can tell you these things. Scouting in the off season, knowing where the acorns are gonna be the next year. What trees hit this year, what trees didn't. The bedding areas, you know, shed hunting is a super time of year to know that stuff. Go in there, learn your property, learn the funnels, learn the little stretches, learn the water holes where they drink. Any of those little tiny things can give you an advantage when it comes to hunting a deer that's 5 to 7 years old. Other keys to this is having a clover plot, having that mock scrape, taking advantage of his dominance or any big deer's attitude, and they all want to work that scrape and tell everybody they're there. And again, this is just a true testament to something like phase. It's distracting deer from being deer as much as possible. Make sure like access and getting out is very, very important, because you can blow your spot so fast, or you can blow that exact moment of the kill shot. Like if I'd have walked in where he's smelling the ground behind us, he'd have never got to us to where we could get a shot if he'd ended up busting us. So you just got to think about those little tiny things, and a lot of times that's what separates hunters from killers.